All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We usually think of ancient scriptures as this fixed, unchangeable monolith, just a single, solid book handed down exactly the same way through history. But today, we're going to put on our linguistic detective hats. We are going to uncover how the sheer mechanics of translation, along with massive libraries of discarded texts, completely shift the meaning of the scriptures we thought we knew inside and out.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. A vast library of texts. 2. Lost in Greek translation. 3. Gender clues in parables. 4. The Aramaic Peshitta perspective. 5. Uncovering alternative gospels. And finally, 6. The quest for original meaning.
Starting with Section 1. A vast library of texts, beyond a single book.
To kick things off, we really have to wrap our heads around the sheer volume of texts out there. Massive compilations like the Grand Bible concept completely overwhelm us with documents, proving that biblical literature is way, way bigger than just the standard Old and New Testaments. We're talking about a massive expanded universe here. You've got the Qumran library, the Apocrypha featuring books like Tobit and Maccabees, the Pseudepigrapha with Enoch and Jubilees, and even later creations like the Jesus Sutra. It is a sprawling, chaotic library of voices, and honestly, so many of them were just left on a cutting room floor of history.
And even if we zoom in and just look at the early English versions, the accepted text was constantly in flux. From the Tyndale New Testament in 1525 to the Great Bible in 1539, right through to the Geneva Bible in 1557, the words, the phrasing, and the editorial choices evolved nonstop. There really is no such thing as a single static English Bible.
Moving on to Section 2, Lost in Greek Translation, the Mechanics of Language.
So, the absolute kicker here is how the limitations of English literally erase deep, meaningful details from the original Greek text. Greek is what's called an inflected language. That means words actually change their physical form to give you extra layers of grammatical information. In English, we just use the word it to refer to animals or inanimate objects, right? But in Greek, these things carry a specific gender. And when translators flatten all that rich nuance into the English word it, a massive amount of hidden code is just completely wiped out.
Take this incredibly famous quote from the King James Version. Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." But look at the Greek, and it reveals this fascinating hidden layer. The Greek word for temple is masculine. Because of that inflection, Jesus literally said, "I will raise him up." Since Jesus himself is also masculine, the statement suddenly becomes this brilliant double entendre. It could mean the physical building, sure, but it also deeply references his own physical body. Modern English readers completely miss that intended duality.
We also lose the literal meaning of actual names and titles when we rely on transliteration instead of true translation. This shifts our whole interpretation of key biblical figures and roles. For instance, the Savior's much more accurate Hebrew-derived name is Yehoshua, not the heavily Greek-influenced Jesus. And the word Satan, it's not actually a first name. It translates literally to adversary. When you read these texts using their literal meanings, the entire narrative tone shifts dramatically.
Let's keep exploring this in Section 3, Gender Clues in Parables, Hidden Layers Revealed.
Let's compare two really famous parables about finding lost things to see how Greek inflections change the read. In the parable of the lost sheep, a man finds his sheep and calls his friends. In the parable of the lost coin, a woman finds her coin and calls her friends. Now in English, they both just call friends and neighbors. Simple enough. But the Greek grammar explicitly marks the man's friends as masculine and the woman's friends as feminine. The man called together his male friends, and the woman called together her female friends. It's a super vivid, specific social detail of the ancient world that is entirely erased by the broad strokes of English translation.
All right, Section 4. The Aramaic Peshitta perspective. Claims of the original word.
What if we bypass Greek entirely? Enter the Peshitta. This is an Aramaic New Testament, translated word for word, letter for letter, into English by Glenn David Bosher. This perspective argues we shouldn't even be looking at the Greek, but rather focusing strictly on the Aramaic language that was actually spoken in the region at the time. Now, impartially reporting on the translator's own preface here, the claims surrounding this are absolutely staggering. Bosher makes the incredibly bold claim that he has discovered, quote, scientific proof that this exact Aramaic text was perfectly preserved and written directly by God himself. Whether you agree with that or not, it really highlights the intense passion and the starkly different foundational texts that scholars bring to the table.
Next up, Section 5, Uncovering Alternative Gospels, Radical Theological Shifts.
Let's look at how alternative gospels introduce some teachings you have probably never heard in a traditional church setting. First up is the Essene Gospel of Peace. This text claims to restore lost biblical truth. For example, it claims to correct historical doctrinal errors, like a supposed false worship of angels, bringing the focus entirely back to God alone. But even more fascinating, it places a massive emphasis on original dietary and healing instructions. It suggests a highly health-conscious, almost ascetic lifestyle for the original believers that traditional Bibles just do not focus on.
Then there's the Gospel of the Holy 12. This text claims to restore teachings from the timeline of Jesus' life that were supposedly corrupted or removed by early followers who, as the text hilariously puts it, too slow to accept teachings of reincarnation and far too attached to their flesh and alcohol. Basically, their beef and beer. Apparently, ancient dietary debates were just as intense back then as they are today.
And we see wild variations in the actual stories, like Jesus feeding 1,000 people with just 5 melons. That is a lot of melon. But more profoundly, this gospel introduces deep theological shifts, specifically declaring that man's body is the temple of God. It essentially uses these stories and numbers as metaphors for parts of the human body, showing what goes on within the microcosm reflecting the vast macrocosm of the spiritual universe. Instead of a physical stone building, the human body itself becomes the focal point for divine activity. It even explicitly states that in each of us, the Father-Mother may be seen, introducing a dual-gendered understanding of the divine that is completely absent from the standard Greek texts. Furthermore, the Jesus portrayed in this alternative text is fiercely against animal sacrifice. He's depicted quoting the prophet Jeremiah to speak out directly against all blood offerings, openly declaring the temple at Jerusalem polluted by slaughter. It is a radically different portrait of his life's teachings and his ultimate mission for humanity.
Which brings us to Section 6, the quest for original meaning, an ongoing journey.
We've covered a ton of ground today, from hidden grammatical syntax to entirely different gospels. So what should you really take away from this explainer? Mostly that our understanding of the divine is heavily shaped and sometimes severely limited by the tools of language and the choices of human translators. Modern English erases the rich, gendered clues of the Greek. At the same time, alternative texts like the Aramaic Peshitta claim absolute divine perfection, while discarded works reveal entirely different, mystically and health-conscious narratives. The idea of a single, unchanging monolith is, for sure, an illusion.
So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. If language always acts as a filter, and history is overflowing with thousands of different, contradictory source documents, can we ever truly read the original word? Or is the search for meaning less about finding a single perfect document, and more about understanding the vast, beautiful, messy tapestry of human translation? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions.